Welcome to this video. This is Aya Adnan. I am a functional consultant at Solvait. This video is one of Solvait Dynamics 365 training series. In this video, we will discuss overtime. We will start with an overview, then we will discuss overtime setup and overtime transactions, and finally I will introduce you to overtime reports. To access overtime, go to Solvait Payroll, then overtime. In this section, you will find overtime request, overtime transactions, overtime reports, and setup. Using overtime, you can save time and transaction costs and streamline overtime process by using Solvait Payroll to grant overtime transactions. And also let workers handle overtime requests and access overtime reports. Let's start by explaining overtime setup. Click on Overtime Types. Here we can see all overtime types that are already defined in the system. You can define overtime types based on company's policy and requirements. Let's take this example, weekend overtime. The first thing we need to do is to define the description and also the overtime type name, or what we need to call it. And also here we can specify if it's paid in a certain sub-cycle so that it's outside the usual or the current pay cycle, so that it can be paid outside it by a sub-cycle. Here we can define if it's paid with salary or not, and we should choose the calculation ID in which it will be deducted or calculated. The hourly rate represents the number of hour rates for each hour. In this case here, hourly rate is 2. It means for each 1 hour, it's considered as 2 hours. For example, if a worker has 6 hours overtime, it will be considered as 12 hours overtime. And if the hourly rate is 1.5, the calculated hours will be number of hours times 1.5 and so on. Here we can specify the calculation period to be per month or per week. When I choose per month, I choose the number of hours here to be 240, which is the number of working hours. That means 8 hours a day and 30 days a month, which is 240 hours a month. And we can also specify it for the week. We can define any type of overtime with these customized fields and change the calculation ID, change the hourly rate based on our features or requirements. Now we are done with overtime, overview, and setup. Let's now discuss the transactions. Go to overtime, then overtime transactions. Here we can find all the overtime transactions in this grid. We can also hide one of the columns and add another column using this button, right click button, and then add column, or we can hide columns. In this grid, we can find some of the overtime transaction details, amounts, number of hours, submit as ready, paid, status, and other fields, such as also overtime transaction sequence number. To create a new overtime transaction, click on Overtime Transactions, choose the worker ID. I selected Alex Smith, and now choose the date of overtime and overtime type. I will choose normal overtime. Now we will specify number of hours, which is 3 hours. The amount will be automatically calculated based on the calculation ID of this type and also the hourly rates. Now we can add here if any notes needed, and also if it's paid with salary. And now we can submit as ready if we make sure all the overtime fields are correct. So I will click save. Now it will be saved. If it's paid outside salary, we can find its journal batch number here. When we go back to the grid, we can find this overtime transaction that we just made or created, and we can find all its information. To submit it as ready, we can also submit it from here, from this button, and we can go back and make it unpost to unpost this transaction, so we can be able to edit it before submitting or posting to PayCycle. So when you click or select any one of these submitted overtimes or overtime transactions, you can click on unpost. It will be automatically unposted, and then you can edit it directly. But once anything is posted or submitted, it can't be edited again unless it's unposted. Now we are done with overtime transactions. I will now show you two reports related to overtime. There is a separate video that explains the reports in details, but in this video I will only introduce you to the overtime reports, which is overtime transaction and overtime employee overtime transactions. Now we are done with overtime. We discussed setup transactions and introduced to the reports. Thank you so much for watching. Looking forward to see you in the next video.